This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Parshas, Achrei Mois, Kedoshim, Emor, it depends where you live, you know? So I want to talk about a subject that has to do with Achrei Mois, Kedoshim, and Emor. Achrei Mois, after people's demise, Kedoshim, then everybody considers them holy tzaddikim. That's certainly a phenomenon in this world. In Parshas Emor, it talks about Kiddush Hashem, Chilul Hashem. And what we're going to speak about today is probably the most sensitive and delicate subject in Jewish history, rabbinic controversy. Now, whenever there's rabbinic controversy, there's always a major issue of Chilul Hashem, especially when a great Rav or a great Gadol is accused of a fundamental lack, not only in mitzvah observance, but in the Yesodei Ha'emunah. So now, what do we do with him? So the higher the caliber of the Gadol and the higher the caliber of the Rav, the more difficult the situation becomes. If you have a Rav, a Chveis, a rookie, and he's in some small startup shul, so what's the big deal? You get rid of him. He's gone the next day. But you didn't prove anything. You don't have to prove anything. That's it. There's no... the repercussions are not really that severe. The more serious the Gadol, the more serious the Rav, you have to be very careful, because if you take down this personage, coming down with him is the whole esteem and the whole prestige of Rabbanos and Rabbinic Judaism and Kol HaTorah Kula. But what do? You leave the Rav in there? What are you supposed to do? What's worse? Is it worse to have a great Gadol B'Yisrael who is lacking B'Yisodei Amunah, or is it worse to take him down publicly, and by taking him down, it brings down the whole Rabbanos and the whole Kavod HaTorah? Now, let me just begin by saying the kavanah in presenting the shir is only to uphold and to elevate kavod tzaddikim and kavod chachamim, like kavanasi in any way to minimize the esteem and the prestige and the honor that we accord to Gedolei Yisrael, especially to tzaddikim who lived in the past. But the reality is that there are certain controversies that have come up throughout Jewish history, that if you're a Jew who has a heart and has a mind, you need to know about it. You can't live with your head in the sand, and you can't ignore major events that have happened in the past, especially when it's a controversy that really was the beginnings of Haskalah, Chasidus, and many of the movements that we face today are rooted in the controversy that we're going to speak about tonight. So I guess the convenient way is to, you could go to yeshiva and you could learn Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos, and you'll never know that this happened. But in a way, you won't be a fulfilled Jew, because it's impossible to understand the times that you live in if you don't understand the background and what has led up to what we face today. So with that introduction, we offer a tefillah, shelo ekashal chas v'shalom, in presenting any of this information, or chas v'shalom in infringing on the kavod of tzaddikim and gedolim. Okay, let's begin with what's brought down in the hakdama of the Yaros Tavash, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Now, the title of the shir that I picked today was not my own title. I don't take credit for it. This is a well-known title that was used by a great professor of Jewish history. His name is Professor Schneier Lyman, who wrote extensively on this subject, and he has many articles with this, at least the first part of the title. Some of the Marmakoimos that I'm going to speak outside are sources that are not published except for in his articles. But on your sheets, I wanted to be loyal to the process of this year. And the process of this year is we only examine traditional sources in the Sifrei Kodesh, in Rishonim, Achronim, Shalsei Teshuvos, and I did not quote on this sheet any secular sources. That's the process of the shir. It's a shir in Torah, but nevertheless, everything that we bring down over here is already codified in the Sfarim of the Achronim, and I may add things that are found elsewhere, but at least on the text that you have in front of you, it all comes from well-known Sfarim that are available to the public. Okay, so let's begin with the following. Take you back to the 18th century, the mid-18th century, and a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Yehuda Modron, once heard from his Heilige Rebbe, the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer made the following comment, that in his generation, who was around in his generation? Chassam Sofer, Hafla, Rav Nosson Adler, Vilna Gaon, Noda Yehuda, Rav Yonasan Eibeshutaz, Rav Yaakov Emden, Pnei Yehoshua, Shagis Aryeh, Chacham Tzvi. It was a Dardeya. So much so that not since the generation that left Egypt was there a generation of so many all-time Gedolei Yisrael. That's what the Chassam Sofer said. Which is Davar Pella. What does that mean? Greater than the Rishonim? Greater than the Achroinim? Greater than the Nevi'im? That's what the Chassam Sofer said. That never in the history of the Jewish people was there a Dardeya like that generation in the 18th century. So why couldn't they bring the Mashiach? If not for the Machlokes that they had, Vaday the Mashiach would have come. And now we know why the Satan instigated, because the potential there was so great. But that's the backdrop of tonight's year. We're talking about a unparalleled generation in Jewish history. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz were no friends. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's not beat around the bush. They were not friendly going way back. In fact, there are legends that already when the Chacham Tzvi, who is the father of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, published the Chacham Tzvi, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz was a young boy, 7 years old. Legend has it Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz had kashas on the Chacham Tzvi, and the Chacham Tzvi said, "Oi, I don't have koyach to fight you. I'll let my kid take care of it in the future." That's the legend. Whether it's true or not, we have no idea. But even beyond that, in the year Tuf Pei, that's the year 1720, when Rabbi Yaakov Emden went through Prague, he did not go out and greet Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, one of the Rosh Yeshiva of the city. So apparently already back in 1720, there was something brewing over there. Now again, I'm not telling you what I heard, I read it in a newspaper. Everything I'm telling you tonight, I'm telling you from our Mekayimos, from Sifrei Achroinim. This comes from a kuntris written by Reuven Margolius. Reuven Margolius wrote the most prominent sefer from Masechta Sanhedrin, Margolius Hayam. He wrote a 16-page kuntris on the Machlokes of Yaakov and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, which is not available. It's not in print. You can get it on Otzar HaChochma. He writes that already in 1720, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, Rabbi Yaakov did not go out to greet Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. And many believe that, so to speak, if we could use the expression, the bad blood originated going back, actually was exasperated in the year 1749. In the year 1749, the three great communities of Ehu is Altona and Hamburg and Wandsbek, they were picking a new Rav, and the incumbent, everybody thought it's got to be Rabbi Yaakov Emden. After all, the last Rav of Ehu was the Chacham Tzvi. And, as a young boy, as a great Talmid Chacham, living in his father's shadow, his dream was to be the Mamala Makam of his father. Not only that, his grandfather was the Rav of Ehu. So, and now when the position became available, he was one of the candidates, and who is he up against? Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz got the job. So many trace that whatever ill will was traced back to that particular candidacy that Rabbi Yaakov Emden did not get the position. Again, I'm not offering my comments, and I would never criticize any Gedolei. I'm just telling you what it says in the Sefer. Whether this is correct, whether this is not, certainly Rabbi Yonasan, what the facts are, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz beat out Rabbi Yaakov Emden to get the job. And the particular debate, which really went viral, which was exasperated in the year 1751. So let's explain what happened. 1666, Shabtai Tzvi, the mystic who proclaimed himself the true Messiah, who was a brilliant scholar, and on the other hand, probably manic depressive, he officially converted to Islam. And now, in his time, many Gedolei Yisrael believed that he was the Mashiach. Many Gedolei Yisrael. Despite his conversion, that did not sway many people from believing he still is the Mashiach. He dies in 1676. Years pass, you would expect that his followers, Sabbateans, the Shabtaim, they would die down, the movement would wane. Not at all. It was fast, powerful, and furious, continuing for decades, and decades. In fact, 100 years later, there were still Gedolim who very possibly, in some way, were believers in the Shabtai Tzvi. How that's possible? Comes the year 1751. It was February 4th, 1751. And word is spreading that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, who, by the way, was one of the most brilliant all-time Talmidei Chachamim, master of Shas, master Makubal, a tremendous personality, a very outgoing personality, one of the most colorful Gedolos of all time. He was not somebody who sat in his Daled Amos locked up with his Svarim. He, as great of a Talmid Chacham as he was, perhaps the greatest of the generation, he was an outgoing, friendly, charismatic, charming personality. He was friends with Jews, he was friends with Goyim, with priests, with everybody. He was well connected in the government. And he's going to be very hard to bring down because he's so charming and well connected that this is going to be a tough one. Well, for many years already, so let's go back to the Rabbanos in Prague. Who is the Rav in Prague? Rav David Oppenheim. Rav David Oppenheim, on his deathbed, issues the following warning. You know, Hineni Anochi Hoylech Lamos, the next Rav of the city has to be named mayor. And then he died. The problem is, there's nobody who knows a black Gemara named mayor, and in the whole world. So who's going to be the next Rav of Prague? And that's why the answer is nobody. Nobody's going to be the next Rav of Prague. And Prague remained without a Rav for many, many years. So it's 1736, there's no successor. Comes Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, and he is the Rav, the Rosh Hashiva, the Av Bezdin, everything short of chief rabbi of Prague. He didn't get the job. He wasn't offered the job. The job is not available. His name is not mayor. Okay, so he leaves. He becomes chief rabbi of Metz in 1742. Now listen to this. Comes the year 1751, Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam is, for the first time, he's offered the position of chief rabbi of Prague. The problem is the following story then took place, and Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, who, by the way, is the brother of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he loses the job. So he had, just basically packed his bags to go to Prague. He unpacks and he stays in Amsterdam. Now, what happened? February 4th, 751. Word has spread that Rabbi Yaakov Emden, that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is pawning off, he's distributing kameos. What's a kameos? Some kind of Kabbalistic parchment that you wear around your neck, and if somebody is sick, or a woman is pregnant, or a woman can't have a child, they go to this Makubal, and the Makubal writes various shemos, and supposedly Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz was already distributing these kameos already for 20 years, from the time he was the chief rabbi in Metz, and certain Talmidei Chacham have opened up the kameos, and it's indisputable. There are references, there are mentions to Shabtai Tzvi. And it seems like this Gadol Hadar, this Gadol Yisrael, somehow is connected to Shabtai Tzvi. Either he believes in it, nobody could understand what in the world is going on. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is the Rav of Ehu, and word spreads in Ehu, in Altona, Hamburg, Wandsbek, that the chief rabbi in the Gadol Hadar is a closet believer in the Shabtai Tzvi. So they convene, the leaders of the city convene a meeting. They bring in Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who again we mentioned is no friend of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden, this was Tuesday, February 4th, 1751. Rabbi Yaakov Emden is looking around the room, and he sees the board, and he says, these guys, the cards are stacked against me. There's no way these guys are going to find their chief rabbi guilty. He's the most charismatic, brilliant rabbi in hundreds of years. He's well connected. There's no way they're bringing him down. They decided to reconvene and have the meeting again on Thursday, February 4th. Rav Yaakov Emden, being a very sharp and wise man, he knew that the conclusion on Thursday was going to be that he's innocent. And therefore, Rav Yaakov Emden, who had a house minyan. Now, house minyanim are big trouble. You shouldn't daven in a house minyan. I'm not embarrassed to tell you. You should not daven in a house minyan. Not Friday night, not Shabbos day, not Shalosh Shudas. What's a house minyan? House minyan is a minyan where we don't need a Rav. That's the whole point of the minyan. Why can't you go to shul? What's wrong with the shul? Shul is nicer than the house. House minyan is called convenient Judaism. But anyway, Rabbi Yaakov Emden had a house minyan. And it was big trouble. And his private house minyan, he gave a clap on the bima, and in his clap on the bima he said, the chief rabbi is a believer in Shabtai Tzvi, he's unfit to be Rav, he's unfit to be Rosh Shiva, he's unfit to be Doresh, he cannot service the Jewish people, anyone who believes in him is in big trouble. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden sort of stopped short of putting him in cherem. Word then comes to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz that Rabbi Yaakov Emden made this announcement. Now, worse than that, not only did word come to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, word came to the board in Prague. So what did they decide? Rabbi Yaakov Emden was placed under house arrest. Okay? All social contact with Rabbi Emden was banned. In 6 months, he must leave the city permanently. Last Friday was Rabbi Yaakov Emden's last day in Altona. On that day, he managed to get letters out to all the Gdolei Yisrael that we have to remove Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. That's the story. Meanwhile, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz hears that Rabbi Yaakov Emden is almost put him in cherem. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, wait a second. I thought I'm the chief rabbi around here. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz then placed Rabbi Yaakov Emden in cherem. Him, v'chol talmidav, v'chol hanilva elav, v'chol hamasayim oisai, v'chol mishpachtoi. Ha! Rabbi Yaakov Emden, I'm in cherem! You're in cherem. Your family's in cherem. Your talmidim are in cherem. V'chol hamasayim oisai is in cherem. So basically, in the 18th century, if you were alive and you were breathing, you were in cherem. I'm not exaggerating. Either you were in cherem or you were dead. Basically, the way to determine whether someone was still alive was if they're in cherem, that means they're alive. If they're not in cherem, they must be dead already. When you would take a rabbinic post in the 18th century, the first question they would ask you, whose side are you on? Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. It was bad times. Now, it became so difficult that the issue reached the government. The issue reached all over the Jewish community, to the extent that there were brawls that were breaking out in the stock exchange. They had to close down the stock exchange. There were literally fistfights that were taking place. Either your allegiance was with Yaakov Emden, or your allegiance was with Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. The Jewish world was in shambles. The covet of Rabbanos was dwindling and non-existent. I mean, here you have the Gadol Hadar. Now, by the way, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, maybe second to Rabbi Akiva, was perhaps the greatest Marbitz Torah of all time. Even by account of his detractors, namely Gretz, he had 24,000 Talmidim in his career. So if you're taking down Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, you have to understand, while there are many Rabbanim against him, all the young Rabbanim in the time were all Talmidim of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. The next generation of Rabbanim, where every last one was a Talmid of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz led the greatest and the most superior yeshiva of the time. So if you're going after him, you're taking down the entire generation. So this was a bloodbath. So into this, in Ehu, in Altona.
Was there ever a debate about whether he really believes this or not?
Because what?
Was there ever a public debate about whether...
Okay, so there's this subject we could talk about forever and ever and ever. And we'll never have answers. But yeah, there were basically three approaches to how we're going to deal with Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Rabbi Yaakov Emden's approach was out, 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 out. Now, goodbye. You can't be a Rav, you can't be a Rebbe, you can't be a Rosh Yeshiva, you can't do tshuva. That's it. Somebody who doesn't believe in someone who believes in a false Messiah, ein tikvaloi, he can't be a responsible leader for the Jewish people. That was the position of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And what we're going to learn tonight is there were two other approaches. There was the approach of the Noda B'Yehuda and the approach of the Pnei Yehoshua. It's not so well known they were even involved in this Machlokes. But possibly the most important letter written by a Rav in the 18th century is called the Yegera Shloimim of Rabbi Cheskel Landau, the Noda B'Yehuda. Noda B'Yehuda, the Tzlach, the Tziel Nefesh Chaya, who was born in 1713. So you have to think for a moment. In 1751, he's 38 years old. He's a young man. The Pnei Yehoshua is the senior Rav of the time. By the way, Pnei Yehoshua was the Gadol Hadar. He was the Zaken Hadar. And he was hesitant to get involved at first. And in 1752, Noda B'Yehuda says, enough is enough. Now realize, listen carefully, just realize for a moment, you said in 1751 it was the first time that they opened up Prague to Rabbanos since 1736, since Rav David Oppenheim was the Rav. They offered it to Rev Yehuda Aryeh of Amsterdam, the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. But the moment that they found out that he was against Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, he lost the job. And who got the job? The Noda Yehuda got the job. Noda Yehuda got the job. However, we're going back now to the year 1752. And at this point in time, the Noda Yehuda is the Rav in Yampol, and which was a prestigious city, but not quite the same caliber as Prague, which he would later become the Rav of. So in 1755, he became the Rav of Prague. 1745, he was the Rav of Yampol, and that is when he penned this letter. And he begins the letter, I broke it up into bite-sized. Now, where is this letter published? In the Jewish press, not quite, right? Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, when it got to a point where he could not lead his tzibur anymore, he decided to publish a sefer that records and collects all the letters against him, all the letters supporting him, ultimately to prove his innocence. The name of the sefer is Luchos Ha'edos. And the letter from the Noda Yehuda appears in this sefer, Luchos Ha'edos. And I present to you, we're going to read it, we're going to translate part of it, and I ask you, reader, audience, friends, what is your opinion about what the Noda Yehuda thought about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz? No, I'm not going to editorialize, I'm not going to add, I'm not going to take away. This is the letter Igara Shlemim. Now this letter was so impressive to the Jewish world that ultimately Noda Yehuda got the job in Prague, very, very probably because of this letter. Okay, so he writes to begin with, I have not come here letame, this is in Ois Beis, number 3, not lerachek, to make shalom, and to be makarev. He says, I cannot withhold myself, I cannot contain myself when this is taking place. I don't tell anybody except my opinion, but weigh it with the scales of your seichel. But I tell you off the bat, I'm afraid of no one. So what I say is not because I like or dislike anybody. He says as follows, my policy is if I could be dan lekav zchus, and I will try to do so. But if you want to ask me, I got a hold of these kameos, like in the second column, 7th line. These kameos that were sent to me from Hamburg, from Metz, let me tell you what I see. The clear reading of these kameos, says the Noda Yehuda, if not for the fact that this guy has a cheskas kashrus, and he's a well-known chacham, greater than a navi, meaning had it not been for his reputation, I certainly would say whoever wrote it is a devotee of Shabtai Tzvi. There's no question, he says. In other words, had it not been Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, had he not been who he was, and I would have read these kameos, there's no way around it. You read the kameos, it's clear whoever wrote them is obviously a follower of the Shabtai Tzvi. But so what, says the Noda Yehuda? Number one, is it 100% or is it just suspicion? Number one, it's just suspicion. But bebirur mi yachal adam dvarim shebelev. You can't tell what someone is thinking with absolute certainty just by the way they write. So if you want to know what my personal opinion is based on reading the K'meis, there is no question whoever wrote it is a follower of Shabtai Tzvi. But is it proof? In other words, if you were an attorney and you had to bring into a court of law, is this evidence? This is not evidence. You can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not clear. Number two, he never signed on it. He didn't sign his name on it. Do we know that he wrote it? Number three, so the Bezdin and Metz received Eidos that this is from Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. This is Dinei Nefashos. We're dealing with the rabbi's parnasa and his reputation and his life. This is a life and death case. Was Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz there in the court when they were Makabel Eidos? Isn't the halacha that you do not judge people on their lives unless they're present? Number four, wait a second. How did it get to Bezdin? What do you think? You think in the 18th century, the way it got to Bezdin, they bubble wrapped it and they sealed it with, tamper-proof tape? How many hands How many dirty fingers got to these kameos before they came to the hands of Beis Din? Who knows? Maybe some of the enemies of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz laid their fingers on it. Number 5. This is all if a regular person would have wrote it. But now that we know that the person who wrote it is muchzak b'chachma, av b'toira, goyin meforsam b'chol ha'olam, we need to try to be machriya lekapschos. So I ask you, so far, what the Noda Yehuda is saying, is he suspicious of him, or is he not suspicious of him? Everyone's entitled to their opinion. He's very suspicious of him. He says, had it not been for his reputation, he would say that. For sure, whoever wrote it, the only thing is, in a court of law, we can find him guilty. Next paragraph.
What would be in a kamei that would indicate it's a Shabbat Tzvi?
Allusions to his name. Rashi Tevos that spell out his name. Otherwise, if he's dead 100 years, why are we being merames to him? Why are we referring to him? Unless you felt there was some...
He has no reference to anybody. It's just the shame. Was he asked?
Rabbi Yonasan asked?
Asked if he did it?
Yes, he denied it.
He says he never wrote it.
Yeah, but only after much prodding. Only after much
He
prodding.
never said he didn't write the Kameas, he said he wrote the Kameas. But not...
At first, it was denied. Okay, let's leave it at that. Maybe we'll come back to the subject another time. Next, says the Noda Yehuda. Let's learn how Chazal dealt with rabbinic controversy. The Gemara says they opened up a book called Ecclesiastes, Koheles. What's going on over here? It looks like there's apikarsus in here. It looks like there's things Keneged HaTorah. Says the Gemara, but they opened it up. It starts with Havel Havalim Amar Koheles. They turn to the end. It ends. Soif Davar Hakol Nishmas V'Kim. It starts with Yerushalayim. It ends with Yerushalayim. It must be a good book. So to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. From the time he's young, he was Yoshev b'Yeshiva. He was Maimed Talmidim. He was Marbitz Torah. Nobody ever heard one bad word about him. And Ad Soif Yamav, there is no Moichiach, there is no Marbitz Torah, there is no Rav, there is no Baal Chesed like Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Therefore, Tchila Soif v'Soifai Yerushalayim. Nobody has more Talmidim than Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. So what's going to be? His Talmidim are going to be in Gan Eden. The Rebbe Chas V'Shalom is going to be in Gehenim. Hayitochen azazach. Ois Daled, says the Noda Yehuda. Look at Sefer Yechezkel. There are psukim in Yechezkel that are soiser the Torah. I said, really? Yeah, Parshas Emor, they have Torah. It says in Navi Yechezkel that a kohen cannot eat an avela. Really? I didn't know. There's a special halacha. Kohanim can't eat an avela. What about regular Jews? They could. So it's a stira to the Chumash. Did anybody ever dare open their mouth and question Yechezkel? Yechezkel, well, how could you say such a thing? No. Yechezkel himself personally was never challenged. So if somebody who is soiser the Torah, if he has a Cheskes Kashrus, his reputation is maintained. Certainly, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz never said anything Keneged Torah. We have to maintain his reputation. But, says Noda Yehuda, hey, these kameos, I'm not going to lie to you. With all due respect to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, I tried to darshan it this way and that way and turn it on its head and try to explain how it's not a reference to the Shabtai Tzvi. I am not able to explain the kameos in a way that would not mean that he believes in Shabtai Tzvi. I have no other way to interpret it. But I'll tell you the truth. It's still not explicit. You have to darshan it that it's a reference to Shabtai Tzvi. Now, I have no other way to darshan it. But it's not black and white. Maybe the fault is with me, he says. Maybe I don't know how to darshan it. But this is what I'm going to tell you. These kameos are no better than Sefer Yechezkel. Sefer Yechezkel, before they figured out how to reconcile Yechezkel with the Torah, what was the verdict of Sefer Yechezkel? They were going to be goynei Sefer Yechezkel. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz's kameos are no better than Sefer Yechezkel. Until we know how to explain that it is not a declaration of belief in Shabtai Tzvi, in the meantime we have to be goynez it. And therefore, I, the simple man, says the Noda Yehuda, I will jump to the head of the Jewish people, and whoever wants to listen to me, I forbid b'cherem, that anyone who owns a kameya, anyone who looks at a kameya, anyone who puts it on his kid, anyone who gives it to their wife, their daughter, they are in cherem, their whole family is in cherem. Nobody can make use of these Kameos anymore. It's not better than Sefer Yecheskel. And if you want to listen to me, you take the Kameh, you give it to your local Bezdin. And even better, don't give it to the local Bezdin. Give it to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz himself. He'll bury it. He's not allowed to read it. Anyone who violates my word from here and on should be bitten by the snake of the Chachamim and die. In other words, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, you're a tzaddik yesod olam, you're a dorish nifla, we're not removing you, and your reputation is k'vodim kamei munach. But the kameos from this moment on need to be buried immediately. Anyone who uses them is excommunicated from the Jewish people. Vav. So I know, says the Rabbi, I know Yonasan's going to be upset at me. But what could I do? I don't flatter anyone. He says like this. Even if the kameos were kadosh v'tahar and have no question in them. But there's a problem, and that is the Jewish people are being led astray by these kameos. People think that a great rabbi b'Yisrael believes in the Shabtai Tzvi. So even if he doesn't, and even if they're kadosh v'tahar, you can't leave these things hanging around. By the way, you know, during this era, we're talking about the 18th century. And this is why the Noda is one of the main antagonists to learning of Kabbalah. Because all of these followers of Shabtai Tzvi were heavily immersed in learning the Zohar and Kabbalah, and the Rebbe forbade the Jewish people from learning Kabbalah because of this. He said anyone who's not 40 can't touch it. And even if you are, he said, whatever happened to the Torah, meaning the Gemara? Rebbe Yehuda was very adamant that people stick to learning Gemara, and this is 300 years ago. He said people learning Kabbalah, they don't know what they're talking about. And they're destroying the Jewish people. The followers of the Shabtai in the times of Rebbe Yehuda, they made every lav in the Torah, mitzvah, d'oraisa. They were over arayis b'farhesya. They ate chalavim, they ate tarfis, they ate chazer. And Rebbe Yehuda felt it was influenced by the learning of Kabbalah. And therefore says in Rebbe Yehuda, in my opinion, these kameos, I don't care if they're MS Kadosh V'tar, you got to get rid of them. You know why? Because anytime you try to stop a Sabadian and you say, what are you doing? You're an apikoros, you're a heretic. He said, what do you want from me? You're a big rabbi. He's with us. He's our leader. And this is while Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is alive, and he's makrish that he's a follower of Shabtai Tzvi. Could you imagine what's going to happen? When Rabbi Yonasan's not alive anymore, how the followers of Shabtai Tzvi, they're going to throw everything on Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, and he won't be around to deny it. Says, Zion says in Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, b'makom sheyesh chilul Hashem, ein cholkim kavod l'rav. He's a big rabbi, but if he's reducing kameos that are leading the Jewish people astray, we gotta bury all of them. He's no better than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu made a golden snake. Why did he make a golden snake? Says the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, to be Meshabed Liban Shal Yisrael. And the Jewish people began, and Hashem told him to do it. And what happened? People said, oh, Moshe Rabbeinu made a golden snake. Now they started, the first thing was they made little pictures of golden snakes and they still put it in their siddur. The next thing they did was they probably took pictures of golden snakes and they posted on their walls. The next thing they did is during davening, they posted on the back of the wall and they started davening to the golden snake, the copper snake. The next thing was people were bowing down to the copper snake instead of Shachris Mincha Marav. And Chizkiah HaMelech took the copper snake and he broke it, he ground it up. The Haidu Loi Chacham, and the Chacham said, Good, team. You did good. You did the right thing. Says the Noda Yehuda, Alachas Kama V'Kama. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is a great Rav and a great tzaddik. He's not better than Moshe Rabbeinu. If these kameos are questionable, even if they had to be made at the time, at the present moment, they need to be destroyed and buried. However, Chas v'Shalom, we need to be choishesh for the covet of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. His covet is covet HaTorah. His covet is covet Shamayim. Chalila lahara alav. Chas v'shalom, to suspect him of any doifi, apikarsus, minus. Chas v'shalom, to destroy his Beis Medrash. Chas v'shalom, to say anything bad about him. He's going to return to his Beis Medrash. He's going to darshan. He's going to teach. He's going to lead the Jewish people like yesterday. And from now on, from today and on, after I put a chayim on anyone who uses any of these kameos, if anyone dares say one bad word about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, criticize him, point out any of his chas v'shalom, point out anything wrong with him, he's in cherem, he's excommunicated from the Jewish people. So this was a double cherem. This was a cherem on all of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz's kameos. By the way, in the more extensive letter, he put a cherem on Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz that he can never write another kameo again. He put a cherem on anyone who uses the kameos, and he put a cherem on anyone who dare say one word about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz. Look in Oischas. No, actually, Rav Yaakov Emden did not accept Rabbi Yehuda's proposal. Rabbi Yaakov Emden accused Rabbi Yehuda of what? Also of what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz is accused of? Tongue-in-cheek, probably. However, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz did accept the Rabbi Yehuda's proposal. Okay. Says the Rabbi Yehuda, what more do you want this going to do? Listen to this. They cornered the Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz. They said, look, we got to know something. If you're a secret follower, this can't go on anymore. We need you to publicly put into cherem any follower of Shabtai Tzvi. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz got up and he publicly excommunicated all the followers of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, what do they want Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz to do? Bury all his kameos. So it says, what do you want the poor rabbi to do? He excommunicated all the followers of Shabtai Tzvi. He put away the kameos. Like, what more does he need to do to exonerate himself? Did we ever hear Chas v'Shalom Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz violated a Deraisa D'Rabbanan? No, not even most of the Chasidus. He's a Tzaddik Hadar. We never even had a shemetz of him violating anything, Chas v'Shalom. And therefore, concludes the Noda B'Yehuda, I know both sides are going to say, who's this young whippersnapper who dares stick his neck between the titans of the world? But he says, the truth is, I know my faults even more than anybody else. But I'm not afraid of anybody. I've only come to be Ma'amet Shalom Ba'olam, and therefore it is my suggestion and command that this proposal be accepted. This is the letter of the Noda B'Yehuda called Igara Shloimim, which was accepted by Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz, rejected by Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And I ask you, what do you think the Noda B'Yehuda thought about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz? Do you think that he thought the accusations were excessive? Did he not believe them? One way to say it is, he was danim l'kavschus. He didn't know how it could be explained that there are references to Shabtai Tzvi, and yet Rabbi Yonasan is not a follower of Shabtai Tzvi, but since he's a tzaddik, he's danim l'kavschus. He must be right. He must. He's a mamin. And I just don't understand, and I can't explain it. But we have to bury the kameos because people are being led astray. But he's still on the same madriga as he always was. That's one way to say it. Is that what he means? Or did he have a different approach over here? And we'll examine it based on the letter that was written to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz by Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, Rabbi Yaakov Emden's brother-in-law. And this was also seen by the Pnei Yehoshua. This is the Pnei Yehoshua Shita. And they did not agree with the Noda B'Yehuda. They did not agree. See, Noda B'Yehuda is being very savvy about this Kol Koreh. Think about what he's doing. He's giving Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz a very smooth exit, a very convenient exit. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz could continue presiding, he could continue darshaning, he could continue teaching, he doesn't have to embarrass himself, he doesn't have to publicly apologize. All of that we need to do is get rid of the kameos. So Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz's kavod has been preserved, and we're not worried about any further damage. However, comes Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, look at number 4, and he wrote a letter that is recorded in the Sefer Hisavkus. Hisavkus is the collection of virulent letters written about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutz, and it was composed by Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And this letter of his brother-in-law appears there. Look in Ois Beis, and he writes something very interesting. He says, Yadati gam yadati, I know very well, shechachamim gedolim kamoisam yoidim ha'emes amitai. I know you rabbis know the truth. Now, which rabbis was he talking about? Ach shehim roitzim l'saknoi. They just want to fix Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Amnam tikantem gufoi. V'adarosei. They only fixed his body in honor. V'loi tikantem ruchai v'neshmasei. They didn't fix his soul. Loi kein anachnu, not us. Anu roitzim b'takonosei. We want to fix him. Tikkun nafshai v'neshmasei. We want to fix his soul and his nefesh. We want to put him back on his throne. Now here was the plan. They summoned Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Now there was a bezdin that convened, and they issued a declaration that from now on, any followers of the Shabtai Tzvi, you see, there were all these closet followers of Shabtai Tzvi walking around. And the Gedolim got together and they said, no more closet followers of Shabtai Tzvi. Either come out in the open and say, I'm a follower, and we could remove you from the Jewish people, or we're going to see if your tshuva is sincere. Now, imagine if you secretly believed in something. So, and you had to sit in front of a bezdin, and the bezdin was going to grill you. Do you really believe in it? Do you really believe in it? Now, if you have a really big chacham, I remember one time I sat on a geros. And in the mikvah, the Av Bezdin called out to the person, you believe in Mashiach? Yeah. Do you believe Mashiach will come or has already come? If you tell me he's already come, I'm not going to convert you. That's what he said. So if you have a good Av Bezdin and a real strong willed and with a backbone, they could really surmise what a person's thinking. The Pnei Yehoshua himself was going to grill Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz to see was titzach b'libai. Because anybody could say, you believe in him? No, I don't believe in it. Yeah, right. You know? The Pnei Yehoshua wasn't going to settle for anybody else to do the grilling. So listen to what this letter says. This letter is clearly referring to the Igarish Shlomo of Noda B'Yehuda. And he's saying, Noda B'Yehuda, you want to fix him, but you're just fixing his body, you're not fixing his soul. We're going to sit him down and see whether be'emesin he believes in the Shabtai Tzvi. Now, let's explain, and this is the main part of the shir. The main part of the shir is like this. It should never happen. But there is rabbinic controversy. And what happens if a very, very big person is suspected, not just of lack of observance, but issues in emunah? But here's what are you going to do? You're going to take down a Rosh Hashiva? You're going to take down a major Rav? You take down a major Rav, you're destroying the whole institution of Rabbanos. So there are two ways to go. You know what you could do? If you suspect that a great Rav, there are questions about his emunah, and maybe there are even things that he wrote that are questionable, so you know what we could do? We could do very simple. We could tell him, we want you to denounce anyone who believes in that, so we'll give a big drasha, you denounce. And we were going to bury all those books that he wrote that are questionable. So what did we just do? We suppressed any problems in this person. Do we know was titzach b'libai? We have no idea. But we did what's called damage control. We suppressed it, and we have it under control. In other words, we'll never know what he's thinking. That's between him and God. But maybe we don't have to get that deep. Because if we do get that deep, and it turns out b'libai is not good, and we have to pull him down, along with it might come the rest of the Jewish people. So the opinion of the Noda B'Yehuda was a very politically savvy one. Listen carefully. Noda B'Yehuda held that because of Chilul Hashem, it's not kedai to, face Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz face to face, corner him and figure out exactly what he's thinking. No, damage control. We'll suppress it. What we'll do is we'll isolate him that right now the only thing Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is he's a Marbitz Torah Barabim. He's not giving the Kameis anymore. He already denounced publicly his belief in the he denounced anyone who believes in Shabtai Tzvi. So we've identified for the Tzibur that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz is a Marbitz Torah, and beyond that, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yira L'Levav. God sees the heart. Says the Pnei Yehoshua, but wait a second. You're going to leave him in his post, but maybe in his heart, Yesh Doifi B'Libai. Maybe there's a question about what his emunah is. You're going to leave a Rav, a Rebbe, to be a leader of the Jewish people, and there are questions about what he's really thinking. Ask, what are you going to do? You're going to pull him down? If you pull him down, you're going to be destroying Judaism. Says Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam in Ois Daled, I know what you rabbis are going to say. You want to be chas on his kavod, and I know you're doing l'shem shamayim, and you don't want to make machlokes, and you don't want to make a chil Hashem. But a bigger chil Hashem is to leave someone in their post who might have questionable emunah, and goyim are going to say, you see, even the leader of the Jewish people is a mammon in the false Messiah. This is the nekuda that I'm trying to bring out. There was a very subtle machlokes between the Noda Yehuda and the Pnei Yeshua, how to deal with this rabbinic controversy. Is it the Noda Yehuda held, look, we're only human beings. What somebody else is thinking, we'll never know. And you know what? It doesn't really matter. Let's suppress it. Whatever is thinking, that's in his mind. But we won't allow him ever to say it. His kameos are gone. He spoke out against the followers of Shabtai Tzvi. What is thinking in his heart? That he'll answer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'achamei v'esem shana. Pnei Yeshua said, you're misakein gufay v'loy misakein nafshay. You need to figure out, because if what's going on in his heart is not kosher v'yashar, you can't leave him in his post. Or is it that the Noda Yehuda would just dan him l'kav schus, and he thought hakol b'seder, and this is not a matter of political savvy? Probably the former. I think it's more reading the letter of the Noda Yehuda. There's no question that he had very high level suspicion. I mean, he says, if not for the fact that this was Rabbi Yonasan, he would say bivados about the author. Now, let me just tell you, there is a lot of very disturbing evidence that the Noda Yehuda certainly thought this way. In Rav Yaakov Emden's Sefer Hisavkos, and this is a matter of public history, Rav Yonasan Eibeshutaz had a son in his yeshiva. The son was an open follower of Shabtai Tzvi, to the point where the son openly declared that he was the Navi of Shabtai Tzvi. This is not history. And the Noda Yehuda got a letter from one of his Talmidim. Rabbi, you wouldn't believe it. My chavrus in yeshiva, he's the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. And he would show people open miracles using shemos, using Kabbalah. Says the Noda Yehuda, look, I heard about it myself. I wrote a letter to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. I told him, what's going on with your kid? You got to tell him to stop. And the Noda Yehuda was told by Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, he was taken over by a spirit. And at this point, I don't know if it was a pure spirit or an impure spirit. Be it as it may, the Noda Yehuda then turns to his Talmidim. Do me a favor. Don't pay attention to this Meshuggah. Do not open Sifrei Kabbalah. Don't even look at it. Do me a favor. Shas and Poskim. If you do that, you'll be Zoicha to Olam Haba. Otherwise, you're endangering yourself. Please show this to all my Talmidim in the yeshiva, that there's an absolute decree that nobody may look at the Zohar or any of the Sifrei Kabbalah and not listen to this Meshuggah. And if you could get out of the yeshiva, get out of there. This was the most prestigious yeshiva at the time. So was it that the Noda Yehuda was just being dan him l'kav schus? Or he felt that we're not going to take down the Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. So the only smart aids that we could do is suppress it, damage control, and we've basically cornered him into a situation where he will remain just a Marbitz Torah. Then there's a whole saga. Now, I don't want to get into this because this does not come from the Sfarim. But in the official biography of Noda Yehuda, called Moifes Hadar, Rabbi Kusiel Aryeh Kamelhar, his interpretation of the letter of the Noda Yehuda is that the Noda Yehuda completely exonerated Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. So there is an opinion that after reading the Igarish Shlomo of Noda Yehuda completely acquitted Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. Again, it's up to the reader to decide what do you think the Noda Yehuda's opinion was. But then he tells us of a very interesting finding, and I wouldn't have quoted it had it not been in this biography. He says in the year 1877, in number 8, in the biography of Noda Yehuda, the following discovery was made. Let's see if I can find it. Rabbi Cheskel Landau. Yehuda was his father, and his mother was Chaya, Tzivon Nefesh Chaya.
1741, I'm seeing.
It was published in 1877. So now this is a little curious, because the controversy was in the 1750s. And a letter was found 100 years later in the archives in Prague. And the letter was a letter written to the Empress of Austria. So let's try to paint the picture. In the 1720s, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz was the Rosh Yeshiva in Prague. And he left to become the chief rabbi in Metz. Prague was under Austrian rule. Metz was under the French. The French were the enemy of Austria. So already, at that point in time, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz was banned ever returning to Austria because he went to the enemy. Now in the year, in the 1750s, in the 1760 and 1764, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz wants to come back to Prague and be Rav in Prague again. And he sent a letter to the Empress of Austria, Maria Theresa, to allow him entrance into Prague. It was found in the archives in Prague that a letter was written to Maria Theresa outlining 4 reasons why you cannot let Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz back into Prague. Number 1, because he's from the enemy. He went to France. He's an enemy of Austria. Number 2,
Who wrote this letter?
I'm going to tell you in a minute. Number 2, you can't trust him. Number 3, he innovated the belief in the Shabtai Tzvi. And number 4, he's in Cherem. So if he comes here, I got to move out. Signing on the letter, the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau. That the Noda B'Yehuda addressed the letter to Maria Theresa not to allow Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz back into Prague. Now, this was published by secular scholars, and this is their opinion. That there's no question that Noda B'Yehuda held that Yonasan Eibeshutaz was what he was accused of. However, the Mesorah in Klal Yisrael seems to be that it's a forgery. Why it's a forgery is very hard to prove. Rav Kamalhar says it has to be a forgery because we know that in 1741, just give me a minute. Excuse me, we know that in 1752, the Noda B'Yehuda wrote the Igeres Shloimim, and he defended the Noda B'Yehuda. So what happened? He switched on a dime, and all of a sudden, he went to Rav Yaakov Emden's side? And even more than that, evidence is that in 1764, when Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz died, and word came to Prague, the Noda B'Yehuda got up in the Beis HaKnesses in Prague, and he gave a Harzig, a very warm hesped, and he cried bitter tears over the demise of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. You think someone who would write a letter to Maria Theresa saying that you can't let Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz back into the city would then give such a varma hesped? Is that a compelling argument? Is that not a compelling argument? Doesn't sound so compelling. I mean, if the Noda B'Yehuda's position was, there's a smoking gun over here, and this is very suspicious, and, we have something, but on the other hand, it can't be proven, and we have no edus on it, so of course, the tact, the plan of Rabbi Yonasan, of the Noda B'Yehuda was, we're going to suppress his beliefs, we're going to make him denounce Shabtai Tzvi, we're not going to pull him out of his job because that's going to pull down the rest of the Jewish people. If he's going to come to another city, there's no way in the world I'm going to let him take the job. It's one thing to pull down a Rav who's acting as a Rav because by deposing him, you're going to be destroying rabbinic Jewry. But now he's applying for a new job? I'll give you a mashal. Imagine you have word on somebody that the guy is he's not a good husband. You got to be out of your mind to tell the wife about it. Destroy their marriage. But once the marriage has been dissolved, and he's going out with someone else, so now it's your achrayus to tell the next person, can't marry this person. It's one thing to depose someone. It's another thing to, if he's coming into your neighborhood, So the fact that he wrote a letter to Maria Teresa, even though he basically exonerated Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, it's not really that compelling. What about the hesped? The fact that he gave a warm hesped, is that compelling? Avada he gave a warm hesped. I mean, just because he had a smoking gun, he has no evidence. He's an acclaimed Gadol B'Yisrael. He's a Marbitz Torah Barabim. Suspicions, we're dan him l'kav schus. Now, if you're dan, just because, imagine if you get a shidduch resume, and in the shidduch resume, there are all kinds of questions about the girl. So, I'm not interested. Why not? Be dan her l'kav schus. Oh, wait a second. I am dan her l'kav schus. She's a wonderful girl. I'm just not marrying her. I'm not crazy. So just because you're dan someone l'kav schus, and you don't depose them, it doesn't mean you don't, I'll give you a hesped, no problem. If you look in the hesped that the Noda Yehuda gave about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, now again, don't make a mistake that I am not telling you my opinion. I'm not telling you what I think. The Messiah in Klal Yisrael is Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, one of the all-time great Gedolei Yisrael. And he's exonerated. And Kvodim Kamay Munach, and Chas v'Shalom, you can't even give such a shir about it. We're just going into the mind of what the Noda Yehuda himself thought. It's not clear what he thought. Just because he gave a hesped, let me read to you what he says in the hesped. He says like this. He starts off, and this is published in the Drushay Hatzlach. He says, you're probably wondering why I'm giving a hesped on Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, who we were enemies when we were alive. I'll give you an analogy. Imagine if, imagine if the Republican president of the United States had a levaya, and the Democrat that he beat out, comes into the levaya weeping bitter tears. And she says, I would like to give a hesped. Look, I'm not saying who, right? Say, get out of here, get lost, you phony. These are the most disingenuous tears in the world. You're gloating on the inside. This is such a fabricated story. So the Noda Yehuda says, you're probably wondering why I'm giving a hesped on Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz. It probably doesn't look good. So he says like this, for me to start praising Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz, you want to know what I think about him? Look at the letter that I wrote 14 years ago, referring to the Garish Shloimim. But you should know, there is no Marbitz Torah like him. There's no Machiach like him. There's no Goy Chesed like him. And therefore, it is proper to give a hesped. This is one of the most strangest things you'll ever see. When did you ever see one gadol have to justify and rationalize why he's giving a hesped over somebody? Imagine you went to a levaya of a gadol b'Yisrael, and the person got up, really it's taka the right thing to give a hesped. Huh? No kidding. Well, the fact that he even has to justify, what does that mean? Does that mean he exonerated him fully, or just the opposite? Does that mean that he held there's a smoking gun? I would argue maybe the other way. That maybe the reason he has to justify that he's giving a hesped is maybe just midos-wise and etiquette-wise, he's not the right person to give a hesped. Not that he had suspicions, but because there was antagonism between the two, maybe it just doesn't look proper for him to be the one giving the hesped. So it's unclear. But we'll end off with the following. Actually, when the Noda Yehuda was masped his wife, Liba, he said about her, we were married for 58 years. She served me like a mother. She always fulfilled my will. She always calmed me down. She always made sure that I don't have agmas nefesh. She always relaxed me from my anger. Anger against who? Well, why would the wife of the Noda Yehuda have to calm him down? Calm him down from what? So in Yekusil Aryeh's biography of the Noda Yehuda, he brings down what he heard from a darshan in Prague. That on the day that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz passed away, the Noda Yehuda was told about it, and he said, okay, very nice. So you're going to give a hesped? No. His wife says, you're not going to give a hesped? He says, no. His wife wasn't happy about that. So she went to the shamash. She said, announce in the shuls that tomorrow at midday after mincha, Noda Yehuda is giving a hesped. So the Shamish went around knocking on all the windows. He passes by the Noda Yehuda's window. At 12 o'clock tomorrow, the Noda Yehuda's giving a hesed. Say what? The Noda Yehuda says. Where'd you get that from? And just then his wife walks in and says, told you you're going to give a hesped. And so what does that show? Does that show he had questions on that? You understand? Or maybe it just shows he didn't want to give a hesped because he didn't feel that it would be proper that he should be the one to give the hesped. Mar v'Rabbi, this is a debate that we could have had 200 years ago, 250 years ago. However, now we're in the year 2018. So let me tell you, we'll end with this, for real. There was a big dispute between Reb Meir, Reb Noda, and Reb Shimon Gamliel. Reb Shimon Gamliel was a Nasi. He would walk in the Beis Medrash, everyone would stand up. And Reb Meir would come in, this is the end of Heresy, Gimel and Beis, and Reb Noda would come in, and they would stand up also. And basically Reb Shimon Gamliel said, no, there are no assistant rabbis. I'm the rabbi and nobody else. You're not standing up for other people. I'm in charge over here. So Reb Meir says, really? Who do you think you are? And he whispers to Reb Noda, he doesn't even know Uktzin. So we're going to, when he comes into the Beis Medrash tomorrow, we're going to have somebody call out, hey, Reb Shimon Gamliel, you want to teach us a little Uktzin? He's not going to know, and he's out of here. Reb Shimon Gamliel got wind, and he kicked Reb Meir out of the Beis Medrash. He said, from now on, Reb Meir is Achirim. No one's challenging me. That's the story. Comes Rabbi. Rabbi is the son of Reb Shimon Gamliel. He would continue to call Reb Meir Achirim. He's giving shir one day to his son Reb Shimon, and he's saying over Achirim Shita. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, I don't understand. Who is this guy that you could say over his Shita and you can't say his name? He said, someone who doesn't respect the Tata. Comes Reb Shimon, he says, I don't understand. Machlokes is over already. You got to move on with life. Says Marsha, what's going on over here? To me, this is one of the most important yisodos in Jewish history and in life in general. You want to say Gedolim had a dispute, and you want to say they were not malachim and they were something personal? I don't know. I don't know what's going on in someone else's heart. But it's possible. But now, after the Machlokes is over, you know how you have to look back at Machlokes? You know what you need to say, says the Marsha? What Reb Shimon was telling Rabbi was, Rabbi, when you were alive, when your father was alive, you have to call Reb Meir Achirim because you have to stand up for your father's honor. But now that your father's not alive anymore, forget it, it's over, pal. Meaning, once the Machlokes is over, you're not allowed to say anymore there was something personal. What you need to say is, even if it was personal, and who instigated the personal Machlokes? Who orchestrated it? Hashem. Right? I mean, we're ma'aminim, we're not ma'aminim. So whether these two people had some personal beef, who orchestrated it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That means Hashem wanted there to be a Machlokes. Oh, Hashem wanted there to be a Machlokes. That means after it's all over and all the dust settles, it was a Machlokes l'shem shamayim orchestrated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. He's not Achirim and he's Reb Meir. He's only Achirim when your father was alive, and we have to deal with the personal feelings. Once the Machlokes, once in the next generation, once we're in the year 2018, we look back to Machlokes of Yonasan, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Rabbi Pnei Yehoshua. Rabbi Yaakov Emden will accuse l'shem shamayim. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshutaz held l'shem shamayim, and the Rabbi l'shem shamayim. This evidence that it's over, pal. We're not in the 18th century anymore. We're in 2018. We're in Tafshin Ayin Ches. And now all we have to say is, for whatever reason, we were not zoicha to have shalom 250 years ago. The Rebbeinu Shalom stirred this up, and each shita was l'shem shamayim. But that's not what happened. I'm a historian. No, history is not what happened. History is the way Chazal teach you to look at it. And the way Chazal are teaching us to look at it, Heresy Yadalid, is that after all the dust has settled, it's all l'shem shamayim, orchestrated by Echad, Yachid, Umiyuchad from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Why? That's Hashem's hand in history. Nistara Darkei Hashem. Rabbi Sai, thanks for listening. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.